Hi there, this is Nicole Dyer from the Research Like a Pro question and answer series. And today I'm going to talk about how you can add an entry to a research log in Airtable, and then that can automatically be added to the timeline table through an automation. And one of the great things about Airtable is automations. So this video will cover how it works, how you can use the Research Like a Pro with DNA template available at Airtable Universe that I've set up to use the timeline and the research log together like this, and I'll give you some examples. So hopefully you enjoy this video with this from our recent office hours session for those in our Research Like a Pro online course. Our tip of the month this month is about timelines. And if you're new to the Research Like a Pro course, every month in office hours, we highlight one of the steps in Research Like a Pro. So for this step, the assignment is to gather all of the research that you have currently and previously done on the person in your objective and put it into a timeline. And this really helps you to fully understand what you already know and what you already have before making a research plan. Well, the tip that I want to share today is about making your timeline. And in the new RLP with DNA Airtable template, which is the one we recommend that everyone use, even if you're not using DNA. This is just the only one that I update every year. So you can ignore all the DNA stuff if you're not doing that, but this is the latest template. And I've added an automation to this base. And I've never used automations for any of the Airtable templates I've made in the past. So this is kind of new. So I wanted to highlight how it works today and kind of show you where automations even are in Airtable. And then you might be able to learn something that can allow you to make additional automations. Who knows? A very common request that we always get is how can we automatically have information from the research log put into the timeline? And so this automation does that for you. And so after adding a row to your research log, so let's say you're gathering up all your sources and you're putting them in the research log and then you're making the timeline with it. The research log is one table, the timeline is another table. Well, let's say you add a new source or a source that you had already to your research log, and then you want to add it to the timeline automatically. Now there's a box you can check on the research log row called Add to Timeline. When you check that box, it triggers an automation, and that automation adds that information to a new row in the timeline. And then you can wait. After you're checking the box, it does take a few seconds. So wait 10 to 20 seconds, and then you can see a new row appears in the timeline. You can also see this linked record appear in the research log. So I'm going to show you how that works. So I'm gathering up all my sources that I have on Elam Hollingsworth, and I have this newspaper article that I had found about Elam Hollingsworth. So I want to add this to my research log. So going to my research log, I'm in the research log table and I add a new row and I start filling out the source type, the person, the URL, the website, and all of that. So now that I've typed that all in, I have a row in my research log for this newspaper article. When I add newspaper articles, I always put in the title in the source type because it's a multiple select, so you can have multiple items. So this is because if I have multiple newspapers, I want to be able to differentiate which newspaper article it is. So I put in that it's a newspaper and that the title of the article is Homestead Notice. The person is Elam Hollingsworth. He's a research subject. He's the main person in this example base. And then the URL that takes me to this clipping page. So I use the URL of the clip page. And then I put in the website, newspapers.com, and the locality is Omaha, Nebraska. And then the source date in my research log, I usually just only put the year because sometimes I like to sort this by year. If I put in the whole date, then it's harder to sort it. So I usually put just the source year here, and then in the timeline is where I put the specific dates. And I work on sorting it exactly by every single event. Here's the citation. So if I go back here, you'll see that I'm using Online Repository Assistant, the side panel, to automatically generate citations for all my newspapers.com clippings. So it follows the same pattern of putting the title of the clipping, which I always put in as the title of the article. When you clip an article, you can put in a title for the clipping. So I just put in that article title. So now that comes into my citation. and then the newspaper title, which is already on the page. So online repository assistant Aura can grab that for you. It also can grab the date, the page, and then if you want the column number, you have to add that in. So I would have to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and add column 6 to my citation in my research log if I wanted that. Image, newspapers.com, and then the URL. And when I was working on my kinship determination project for certification, I wasn't using access dates. I just put 1 at the very beginning. All websites were accessed on this date. So I took that off. But usually I do have an access date. So I'll probably add that back in. So that's where my citation came from. So I pasted that here. And then scrolling over, I also transcribed the article. Now, if you notice, the article had a fold in it. So it was missing like 4 or 5 letters of the title. I think this was supposed to say notice, but it just says NCE. So I'm missing the O, T, and I. So three letters there. And then I think right here it's supposed to say has been. So it's missing the S, space, B, E. So it's missing like 4 or 5 letters right here in this fold. So in my transcription, I just had to put some question marks. And whenever I could figure out what the word was, like abandonment, I just put that in square brackets. You can see that the OCR text is here, but it's not very good. So I just decided to do my own. It's okay. And what's interesting is that homestake is actually correct because there was a typo in the article. It did say homestake. Let's see where that was. Right there, steak. So I thought that was funny. But transcribing this was no joke. It was kind of a little bit of a bear. I thought it would be easier. Okay, so now that I have this all filled out with the results, the citation, and everything here, now I'm ready to use my automation. So have you ever noticed that in Airtable, there is an automations tab at the very top? I never had really noticed it until I was researching how to get something automatically added from one table to another. I learned about this. And so usually we're working in the data tab. And so right now we're going to click on the automations tab. And that takes us over here to automations. And in the base, the template that I've published on Airtable Universe for all of you to try, this automation is there. I'm not sure if it's automatically turned on or not. So go to the automations if you're using this base and just check to see that this is toggled on. If it's not toggled on, then it's not going to work. So after you've checked to see that it's toggled on, then you can go back to data. But before we do that, I'm going to show you what it does. So there's a trigger, and when a record is updated, it will add to the timeline. So when we're in the research log and we update that record, the action that will then happen is that a new record is created in timeline. So then over here, you tell it what information you want copied from the research log over to the timeline. So we want to copy over to the timeline. We want to copy over the source date, the locality, and scrolling down, you'll see all the different things that are copied over. Okay, let's go back to our research log now. And this is going to be a little screen capture video showing you how I scrolled over and checked the box and how long it took for that timeline to appear, the timeline row. So I'm scrolling all the way over to the right. And as you can see, this add to timeline column, there's nothing in the timeline right now, or else I would see a linked record. So I checked that box. Now I'm just waiting. And eventually the timeline entry will appear. Okay, that appeared. So after I see that, I'm going to open it up and then you can edit it. The default is to say that the event type is record. And that just means it's copied from the research log. You can type in a different event type here, maybe newspaper article. Then I thought about it and decided to put in something more specific about the fact that he had his homestead entry canceled. So typed that in instead. Homestead application canceled. So that was the event. And then I can put in the more specific date, December 19th, 1868, or whatever. There's a few different dates in here. So then I can actually duplicate this in my timeline and add all the different dates that happened. So there's going to be a hearing on January 28th where he can show up and show any evidence if he hasn't abandoned his homestead claim, and then this notice appeared, this notice was dated December 19th, then there's another date, December 30th, when it was published in the newspaper. So I could potentially put 3 dates from this into my timeline. So interestingly enough, anytime you check the box or uncheck the box in the research log, it adds another row to your timeline. Or you can just go to the timeline and duplicate it. Let's go over to the timeline table and see what that looks like now. All right. So here is the timeline table. So you can see that we're no longer in the research log where we enter sources, but we're now in the timeline where we focus on events and dates. So the information that we had put in about this homestead application being canceled from that newspaper article is now here in the timeline, but in kind of a different format, the event description, the person, the date. So now I could go here and update this date to include the date of that notice, which was December 19th, 1868. And then this is the sortable date so that it can be, this is like genealogical format, and then this is in a format to be able to sort. And then the event type and the place, which was copied over, and then the event details, which are also copied over, but I usually edit this down to just be that specific thing. So the notice that the homestead application was canceled occurred on this date. Then the source links to the newspaper article. So now I can open that and see the full newspaper article. Then I can even duplicate this entry and put in the other date that there was a newspaper that published that information, and then another date for January of 1869 when the hearing was supposed to occur. All right, so that's the tip about using automations. Now let's do a quick analysis of this article for source information and evidence, since that's also a part of the assignment, to analyze the source, which is a newspaper article image. And I decided to go ahead and classify this as an original image. It's an image of an original source, an article in the newspaper. What's interesting about it is that it is pointing us to another record, and that another probably several few different records, which are probably kept by the land office and are going to be held by the federal government, probably in the National Archives, somewhere like that, because this is recording the U.S. Land Office in Omaha regarding his homestead application. So although this is the original newspaper article, it's also telling me there are some other records available. But I don't think that changes the fact that this is the original. This is a notice they wanted to publish in the newspaper, so it's the first time it had been published. And so the next is analyzing information. So the information I chose to analyze was the fact that his homestead application was being canceled. And the informant, the names of them were difficult to read because of the fold in the paper, but W.F. Sweat, maybe Sweat, I don't know, and then E.A. Allen, possibly, not sure. Those are the names of the informants for that information. And my guess is that these are people who worked at the U.S. Land Office in Omaha. So if that is correct, and who else would they be? These people working at the land office did probably have primary information that his homestead application was going to be canceled because they worked there. And so they were witnesses to that information. So this is primary information. Now you can select any piece of information in here to analyze. And the way that we do the information analysis is in the timeline. So that way you have one specific event or piece of information that you're analyzing at a time. The source analysis occurs in the research log because that table is organized by source. So the newspaper article itself is this source, and the information within it could be several pieces of information. All right, lastly, we have evidence. So there are several pieces of direct evidence, and then depending on what your question is, there are also details that could be considered indirect evidence. So let's say that my question was about whether or not he had filed a homestead entry in the Omaha Land Office. This article now gives me direct evidence that he had filed a homestead entry application with the Omaha Land Office. And it's also direct evidence that he had abandoned that homestead. Now, whether or not he really did abandon it or what actually happened was going to be discussed at the hearing in January. So I would like to get more information about that hearing if any records were kept. My guess is that he had already moved And so this also provides indirect evidence that he had left Nebraska because he went and settled in Idaho. And I actually do have his land patent for his Idaho homestead. And I didn't know that he had filed an application to begin a homestead in Nebraska. So I now have direct evidence that he did that. And I also have indirect evidence that he left before December 19th, 1868, when this notice was published. So that's an analysis of the source, information, and evidence that I found in this as I was working on building my timeline for Elam Hollingsworth. Now let's go back to my timeline, and you can see that having this information here helped me. I remembered that he had a land patent, and I was wondering, how did he get a land patent if it was canceled? But looking at my timeline, I realized that the land patent occurred much later in 1888 in Idaho. So this was a new, kind of a whole new source and whole new idea that I didn't know about, that he had applied for land in Nebraska. So that was fun to find. Are there any questions about automations or timelines?
Okay, yes, we have some things to talk about. So back when you were talking about citations, can you just go over a little bit what you are using for citations?
Yeah, I can. All right. So if you haven't heard me talk about this or read my blog article about it, this is called Online Repository Assistant, or Aura. And Aura is a tool that you can download for Windows, and it's a Chrome extension as well. It works together between the Chrome extension and the Windows application to do helpful things for you. And when it says online repository, that refers to all the different online genealogy websites that it works with. It works with newspapers.com, Ancestry, Family Search, Find a Grave, and many others. There's a list. So if you go to the Aura website, it will show a list of all of the online repositories that it works with. What it does is it helps you to copy and paste information quickly into your program that you're using, family tree software, your research log, into Word, whatever you're using. It scrapes the information about the source from the page. So you can see it has kind of the name of the title, the paper, some of the information it can get from the page, including the OCR text. Sometimes this is better than it is on here, but this was a hard to read newspaper. What you can do with Aura for citations is set up a template that takes some of the information that it's scraping, like this, and rearranges it into the preferred citation that you want. And so on this clipping page, I figured out that I can put in the title of the article, and it will then be able to use that in the citation. And I've also set up these templates for censuses and Ancestry so that I don't have to write those anymore. And it's a huge help with streamlining citations. So if you want to learn more about this, I have a blog article about it. And also in our workbook, Research Like a Pro, the 14-day challenge workbook, there's details about using it there. And you can gain access to my Aura templates for the censuses through that as well. So if you have questions about Aura and you want to try using it and you're not finding the information you need from our website, let me know and I can share that with you. But it is definitely a helpful tool if you have a Windows machine to be able to streamline your citations.
Yes, thank you, Nicole, for just going back and explaining more about that. And I did put the link in the chat about the blog posts about Aura. So that's fun and good job for figuring out that little tool. All right, so another question is about copying and pasting a timeline to the new base. And I put in the chat that if you're doing that, you would first put your source in the research log, and then you could use the automation to have it automatically put into the timeline. So it's a little different than how we usually think of working. When we first started Research Like a Pro, we had everyone just add everything to the timeline first. And so this is a little bit different way of thinking, but it certainly keeps you from having to do so much copying and pasting once you have it in your research log and then just automatically add it to the timeline and make the adjustments there.
Yeah, I'm just trying to find a screenshot of the timeline so I can talk about that. But if so, honestly, what we do is we don't usually update our old basis to the new format. So anytime we're starting a new project, we will use the new Airtable base. But if we're continuing an older project, often we will just use the older base because sometimes it is a lot of work to try to transfer everything over. And the old base works just fine, especially if you're just continuing the research. So if you do want to spend the time, just plan about an hour to work on updating your research log. You're going to be copying and pasting some information. What we say helps a lot is to put your old base in one screen and the new base in the other screen, and then try to rearrange the columns of the old base to match the new one. Then you can copy and paste a row over and see how it looks and if it worked correctly. You can even hide the fields and columns in the new base that don't exist in the old base to make it a little easier to copy over. But it isn't, there's no easy way to do that. And we don't always do that. It's not necessary. If you really want to use the automation and you're tech savvy and you feel like you could learn how to do it, look how it works in the new base and then see if you can add an automation to your old base. And that might be another workaround. So that's my thoughts.
Okay,
This
I
this
agree.
question comes up every year about transferring the data from old bases to the new bases. And like I said, we usually don't,
No, we don't unless we're going on with a new version of it and we just really want to do a new a new
right?
base. And
Well, if I had a
I
really old base that didn't have
yeah,
a lot of the stuff,
yeah.
yeah, I did do that with my Dyer project because I started that in like 2019, the
Hmm.
first time I ever used Airtable. So when I did it in 2023, I did update to a new base, but yeah,
Yes, it just depends on what you feel like. It sometimes I just want to try out the new base and do a whole new project and use all the new features, and it's fun. So other times I don't have time and don't want to worry about it. So it's all good.